Welcome to Reflections on Water. I'm Dave Ross.
And I'm Anna Wildeman. This week, we got a chance to sit down with Pat Sinicropi, the Executive Director of the WateReuse Association. And Dave, I happen to think that this topic is so relevant right now, in part because there's such a huge focus on ESG and corporate stewardship pledges. And right now, many of those are focused on carbon. But really in the next few years, and not that far down the road, I think there's really going to be a shift in focus to water quality, water quantity, and water reuse.
Anna, I agree with you, and I think we're already seeing that shift. And I think you'll hear in this interview with Pat how important water reuse is to the future of water management in this country. And Pat will tell us that we have the technology and the capability to use it right now as a water resource strategy. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy this interview with Pat and learn how water reuse has to be part of the sustainability conversations that are already taking place in boardrooms across the country. So let's roll the tape. Pat, good to see you again. Thanks for joining our podcast.
Sure thing. Thank you. It's always good to see you, Dave, and it's nice to see you, Anna, and I appreciate being invited to participate on the podcast.
Well, we're happy to have you. If you could, for our listeners who are unfamiliar, perhaps, with the WateReuse Association, just give us a little background. Tell us about the organization, the members, and the mission.
Well, the WateReuse Association is the only national trade association solely focused on water recycling. And our members are water and wastewater treatment agencies at the municipal level. Our members also include businesses that engage in reuse either because they are consulting engineers who support municipalities in developing and installing water recycling projects, or they are businesses that produce technologies themselves for use in water reuse projects. We're a little unusual in that our members also include institutions, nonprofit organizations, state regulatory agencies, universities, environmental organizations that are interested and involved in water recycling. We focus on advocating for good national policies that help facilitate the adoption of water reuse. Our state sections, of which we have 8, focus on advocating at the state level for good state-based policies that facilitate adoption of reuse. And we also provide broad educational opportunities for our members, networking opportunities to develop a network of professionals in the water sector who work on water recycling projects. And we also try to be a resource for the general public on the safety, reliability, and good management practices on water recycling projects in general. So we're sort of a bailiwick of provide a lot of different services for folks involved in water recycling.
Wow, that's a diverse scope of membership and of issues. I love it.
So, hey, Pat, you mentioned education, engagement, outreach is part of that huge portfolio. Let's focus on education for a second. So, I find that if people think about water reuse at all, they generally think about it from their own experience. But why don't you give us a little background of what are the sources of water that we think about reusing? What do you reuse it for? Is it just wastewater discharges, or give us a perspective here?
You can recycle a lot of different types of water, sources of water. And I think when practitioners and the general public think about water recycling, they may just think about recycling wastewater effluent. And certainly that is the primary type of recycled water that many of our utilities and many of our members do. But water recycling really is about not wasting any water that you use once. whether it's water coming from your home or business, or whether it's water that you're using in processes to run your business, or whether it's stormwater that's falling on your property and you want to capture it to use in your garden or in a cooling system inside a building. Those are all forms of water recycling. And really, the way to think about water recycling is don't use water just once. Let's see if we can use it again and put it to beneficial uses rather than discharging it as a waste.
Pat, let's get to know you a little bit if we can. How did you get into water reuse as a career?
Well, early in my career, I have to say I was a little activist from college days, I will admit.
Something doesn't surprise me about that. I don't know.
I remember working on Clean Water Act issues back in college, seeing the waste streams of water coming out of businesses. So I came through college and through law school with an ethic toward helping communities improve the quality of life in their communities. And when I landed in Washington, I began with the President's Council on Sustainable Development at the time, which took a very broad lens into community development issues, economic development issues, with an ethic toward sustainability, long-term resource recovery, and that kind of thing. And I represented the rural community assistance programs at that time. And as you know, they provide technical assistance to very small communities on water and wastewater issues, help them rehab, restore, and support their local water infrastructure. And it wasn't until that time that I realized how essential water and water infrastructure is to the health of a community. And as you folks know, once you become involved in water issues, they sort of get into your veins and you become quite interested in federal policy, especially about how we manage water resources in this country. So I became very interested and very, very much engaged at that time in policies around small communities, rural communities, and their water resources. And from there, my career sort of wound its way like a meandering river, as all our careers do. From that to working with the Water Environment Federation, to working with the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. And so when the opportunity arose with the Water Reuse Association, I jumped at it.
I got to just say this. There were, 5 or 6 great opportunities for water puns there. You took advantage of one, but you left a few on the table.
I left a few on the table.
I just want to point that out.
Actually, I was
better next time.
I was just so satisfied that you had some puns in there. I mean, you're really picking up the reflections on water theme. I mean, we try to get as many in as we can. But another observation, Pat, is new sources of water in this country. We need them. Right. Water reuse is so important for our national strategy. And it takes advocacy from both the executive director of a trade association and the trade association itself. So I love that you have a little bit of that activism in your background. I think that's a necessary skill set for the job that you have. So you gave us your path into water reuse. As we think about workforce and our next generation of water professionals, what would you say to young water professionals out there, about water reuse as a career?
It is the best career that a young person getting into this business would want to pursue. It really is the future. It's exciting. It's using the most cutting edge technologies that are on the market today. It's really about envisioning a future where we really truly have clean and safe resources of water.
Geographically speaking, I mean, when I think about water reuse or stressed aquifers, I think about Western states, I think about the Southwest, but really, this is across the country. Is it something like 40 states are going to be strained for fresh water supply over the next, decade or so? Is that right?
Yeah, that was the GAO finding based on the survey of states. Florida as you folks know, recently passed legislation that by 2035, every drop of water will be beneficially reused if it would otherwise be discharged in some way. And Florida is doing that. Sea level rise and overpumping of their aquifers is causing the land to sink. It's creating other problems and other issues. They have certainly nutrient challenges in their surface waters, and they're going all in water reuse. They have more water than they know what to deal with, right? They're in Florida. So why does a state like Florida care about water recycling? They care because it's not just about scarcity. It's really about helping our communities really come into the 21st century using the best technology to help manage their water resources.
So you mentioned the 21st century, and then earlier you were talking about the future of water and the future of water reuse. I noticed that may actually be the title of an upcoming symposium, an annual symposium that you guys are putting on. It's called Water Reuse, Shaping Our Past and Charting Our Future. Obviously, you've got the future on your mind. Let's talk about the immediate future. I know the conference is coming up. Why don't you tell us about the conference? What are you going to cover? Who's going to be there? What do you want people to know about it?
We're excited to be in San Antonio, Texas we're returning to in-person conference. We had to suspend for the last 2 years. And I think, Dave, you were at our last in-person conference in San Diego.
It helps when you pick destination cities to get the guy to show up in person. I'll tell you that.
Well, and cities where water is really important. And, San Antonio they were really one of the first cities to adopt a full water recycling strategy. And they have a beautiful river walk that is composed of recycled water that is just a lovely community amenity, and will be right along the river walk for the 3 days of conferencing. We have terrific technical content. We really are known for our technical conferences, our technical content at our conferences. The latest technologies, the latest research, the latest best management practices. So folks come to the conference to receive that good technical training. They also come to the conference to learn about the latest policy developments that are really going to be driving water recycling forward. They come to think strategically, think big, envision the future with their colleagues from around the country about recycling, about water reuse. And it's a fun time. It allows our members to take a break from their workaday tasks and enjoy each other's company. We're excited. We're planning some great plenary sessions. Dave's going to help us out on one of them. Thank you very much. And it's going to be a great time.
I wanted to talk a little bit about some water law and policy substance, if we can. Can you talk to us a little bit about the association's role in developing the National Water Reuse Action Plan?
Well, what was our role in developing the Water Reuse Action Plan?
How much time do you have, Pat?
Right. Wow. Well, Dave said, hey, I have this idea. And we said, Dave, that's a great idea. If you do this, you can count on us. And Dave's vision for really pulling together the national federal family, pulling together stakeholders to set an agenda for the future that would really help drive water recycling forward. What our role was to help Dave make that work. And we didn't have very much time, did we, Dave?
Well, I lacked patience, and I saw a need and really wanted to capitalize and have really accelerate water reuse. And I knew you guys had the, both the organizational structure and the membership to be able to help the federal government and the federal family pull that off. So, yeah, it was a short shot clock, but man, did you guys deliver.
Well, we were able to pull together our membership. And the nice thing about our members, and the thing I really like about our organization is that It's really a collaborative process between municipalities and businesses and the business community and the nonprofit and regulatory community. We really put a premium on our municipal members speaking with our business members, speaking with our regulatory and institutional members to sift through those policies that really make sense and that can really help support water recycling and cut down on the barriers, cut down on some of the regulatory barriers that may sometimes gum up the process.
They always seem to pop up here and there, don't they?
Seem to pop up.
What are you currently focused on for RAP implementation? Just give us a few examples of what the Water Reuse Association is working on.
Well, we're working on several case studies that reflect the best of water recycling in the country. We're working on Corporate Champion Award in the private sector to recognize and spotlight the work that's being done in the private sector. We're helping develop fit-for-purpose specifications for on-site recycling. We're providing a forum for state regulators to come together on an annual basis to learn lessons and share information about best regulatory practices at the state level. We're doing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it's a huge effort. In fact, when we rolled it out and had the conversation about EPA leading the development of the National Water Reuse Action Plan, we actually had some philosophical conversations about, is that appropriate? What is the appropriate role for the federal government? And as you think about, Congress just weighed in fairly significantly in the infrastructure bill with new funding, new opportunity. So what do you think, Pat, from, in your chair, what do you think about is the proper role of federal government in deploying water reuse as a national strategy?
I think the federal family has an important role, right? The federal government has important federal investment programs, clean water, state drinking water, state revolving fund programs, the funding at the Bureau of Reclamation. So first, they're an important funding partner. Second, obviously, they oversee the two most important federal statutes related to water management, which are the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And to the extent that those acts provide guideposts for states to enact good oversight of water recycling projects, the role of the EPA in that instance is to make sure that there are no glitches, that we're coordinating properly on those guardrails. The federal government also has a very important role as being a modeler of these practices. They maintain thousands of facilities around the country, whether those facilities are within the Department of Defense or federal office buildings. Those are opportunities for the federal family to adopt water recycling practices themselves. And that kind of engagement actually is quite important. It demonstrates success and demonstrates value.
I didn't hear a call for additional regulatory initiatives off the Hill or out of EPA at this stage. And what I did hear is that you were talking about state deployment of their state-specific regulations. Do you see a need for additional federal regulation in this space yet, or is it let the states roll?
I think it's letting the states roll and developing regulations that use the resources available at the federal level, remain in the between the guardrails set out by the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act, and then letting the states be those laboratories that we like them to be in terms of policies and regulations that really can accelerate water recycling locally. Because water recycling takes many different shapes in many different regions. In California, water recycling is going to look different than it is along the Maryland coastline. I think we have sufficient regulatory oversight from the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act to ensure that the various use applications of recycled water are protective of the environment and protective of human health.
You mentioned that you see states in a role to accelerate water reuse. What do you see as the main drivers of that acceleration?
Well, I think there are several, scarcity is certainly one of them. So in the arid regions of the country, we're seeing reuse become more quickly turned to for adoption. Technology. The technology is available. Technology is proven. Leaders in the water space that want to use the resource in a better, more valuable way realize the technology is there to allow them to do it. So I think technology is an important driver in this conversation. Why not use the technology that we have to provide the water quality that best fits the application that you need it to? So you're not spending needless amounts of money, right? If you don't need the highest quality of water, you don't need to treat to the highest level. But if you do need to treat to a very high level, the technology allows you to. So the technology itself is such that it's allowing fit for purpose water recycling. And that's an important driver. And I also think ratepayers, if you look at regions like the Chesapeake Bay, ratepayers are investing a lot of money in treating to very high quality standards for water. Their money is going into purifying wastewater effluent. And just to see that effluent being discharged into dirty bodies of water or salt water to then have to take back up that water, treat it, and use it again, it just doesn't make ratepayer sense at the end of the day, especially when the technology allows you to do something more creative with it.
You talked a little bit about technology, accelerating the deployment of water reuse. What do you see as sort of the major impediments in the acceleration of water reuse? So, what are the roadblocks that we're going to have to overcome in the next few years, next 5 years?
I think one, it's communications, public education, getting the word out that technology does exist to allow companies and municipalities to recycle water. Public education, communication, very important. Funding will be important also. From my perspective, we are really poised to use water recycling to really transform how water is managed and transform our water management infrastructure. And to do that, you do need some funding. Congress came in the 70s and 80s and invested a huge amount of money to get municipalities and businesses to go to secondary treatment. That didn't happen just by the business as usual ratepayer strategy. So I do think if we want to leapfrog into the future, if we want to really embrace the transformation that is ahead of us, we are going to need some funding to help communities do that.
I'm glad you mentioned the future. Can we look 10 years out? Where do you see water reuse in this country?
More and more utilities, more and more communities will be consuming water that has been used already in the treatment process. And I also think that you're going to see a lot of business leaders adopt recycling practices in situ in their buildings and facilities. I think they're realizing the technology exists. It's probably more affordable at the end of the day after the initial investment. And to demonstrate that they care about sustainability issues and the environment for the future of this country, they're going to use on-site recycling more and more. So I think in 10 years, you're going to see a much different landscape.
Pat, I agree with you. Use the word sustainability. We're seeing a shift, obviously, with the ESG movement, and a lot of the focus and a lot of the press has been on carbon, but a lot of people are starting to drop into the water pledges and sustainability pledges from a corporate America standpoint. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So Pat, we can go on all day talking water use because it's important enough to be talking about. We really want to thank you for your leadership as the executive director of the WateReuse Association, your passion for this area. and for taking some time to join us on Reflections on Water. It's we're really looking forward to getting this out and having our listeners get to know a little bit about you and water reuse as a national strategy going forward. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was fun.
So we'll see you in San Antonio.
Thanks, Dave. And just to remind folks, registration is still open. They can go to our website, WateReuse.org, water reuse spelled with one R, and register for the in-person conference. But we are also having on-demand content available on our website after the symposium concludes in San Antonio. And folks can register for the on-demand content as well at our website, www.waterreuse.org.
Copyright Troutman Pepper Hamilton Sanders, LLP. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including, without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.